So this talk is about fixing the internet with responsible disclosures. I'm a security researcher in my spare time. During my normal day job, I'm an innovation manager for the Dutch government. So that means that I investigate all kind of new things that we can use to make, our Dutch government operate more efficient. So I research technology and I debunk hyped innovations. So in the end of the day, we pick the right thing to put our errors on. I come from a radio background, so I like to go with my hardware outside, not connected to the internet, just listen to radio waves. I've been doing that for like 15 years and still like to go out sometimes in the field to see what I can hear and pick up. In the past, I also flew drones to capture radio waves, but in Europe it's almost impossible to fly drones in the city or near to an airport to capture radio signals because people get a little bit nervous from that. But it's still possible to wire your dog with extra sniffing equipment. So my sniffer has a sniffer. I'm a hacker. I'm a hacker all my life. So before we start, I would like to debunk some myths about hackers. We do wear hoodies, but we wear them reverse because that's the best way to store your popcorn in, to keep your hands free. And eating a pizza with a ski mask is nearly impossible. I couldn't find any nice image on Google. As I say, I'm a hacker. I'm also an old hacker, so I'm a member of a group called the Guild of the Grumpy Old Hackers. What we do is we keep an eye on the internet, and when we see young hackers announcing they're going to release a data breach or they're going to dump some data, then we are the first ones to say, wait a minute, maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to, talk with us first, because we have a little bit experience with reporting nasty things and get you a nice feedback for it. So 2 years ago, I started with a colleague of mine, GDI Foundation. This is Vincent, he couldn't be here today. And we started GDI Foundation just to get a better way to report vulnerabilities. As a hacker, if you want to report vulnerabilities to companies, or especially countries or organizations, that's very difficult if you use your hacker line all the time. So you need a name that shows a little bit of trust and is understandable for mere mortals. So we choose for GDI Foundation. And if you want to know what this organization is doing, I suggest you can Google us in the news section and you see a little bit what we've been doing the last years. Last year, we run Project 366, which is a very uncommon project for us because we spend it 15 hours per day for 366 days to find as many vulnerabilities as humanly possible and report them, which resulted in a nice result. We could at least identify 700 very critical vulnerabilities worldwide I lost my train of thought, sorry. In infrastructure and online services. And the best way we thought doing that was using the responsible disclosure. This is the original responsible disclosure policy from the Dutch government, as the Dutch government sees it here. And this is what we added extra for our people that helped us to give a little bit of guideline how responsible disclosure actually works, because it has nowadays a nice framework, but if you just stay nice and loyal and just politeness get you very far in this world. So, responsible disclosure is not new. It's about already 15 years old and its origins from the software industry. It has a nice Wikipedia page. This describes very basically what it does. But nowadays, it is also known as coordinated vulnerability disclosure, and it has its own ISO standards. Actually, the vulnerability disclosure framework, and it has also a framework for handling vulnerabilities, which helps organizations to deal with people who report stuff. And actually, the most nice part that happened was that in July, the US Department of Justice has released their own vulnerability disclosure framework for their government systems. And this is very important because this is based on the NIST standards. So this framework is deployed once, and as NIST is being updated underneath, the framework will always be applied with the latest security standards. And also, 2 weeks ago, the Senate got a new bill that helps researchers to report systems that are vulnerable. And the most important paragraph is that in good faith, engage in researching the cybersecurity of interconnected devices, class of model, you're not going to be liable anymore for reporting it. So that's a very big step forward. And it makes it for security researchers also much safer if this bill will pass. Well, responsible disclosure has become, in the last years, pretty mainstream, also known as coordinated vulnerability disclosure, and there are already many bug bounty programs making this possible. So as you want to start researching online services, you can first check out these platforms, and they will see if there's a responsible disclosure or a bug bounty program in place, so that you can legally start investigating and reporting. The problem is that these bug bounty programs are only limited to what the organization wants you to test. But the internet is much bigger than that. So we tried talking to the politicians in Europe and explaining that responsible disclosure should be for everything, also for companies and organizations that have no responsible disclosure policy in place. And we've been pushing that for the last 2 years, and we're almost at that point that we're going to get a general responsible disclosure or coordinated vulnerability disclosure framework for Europe. So why we do this? So this is, as you can picture, is how the internet looks to us. It's just a big mess, and we just like to dig into it to see what's running it and what's under the hood. And actually, that's not so pretty, because most nice new things like innovations are actually based on things that shouldn't actually not be online, or just meant as a joke, or started very small as a proof of concept and suddenly grow very big. The biggest example is Instagram, that started with 3 persons and 1 Mongo database. That was just an experiment, and in the end, it became a very big service, and it was actually the end of Kodak and Afghaf photograph film. So, going back to Project 366, we've been around the globe, and what we try to do is to find a way how countries or organizations respond to responsible disclosures, because you have to deal with many different cultures, time zones, and also there are always things going on in a country that are not in the mainstream media, but can have effect on the way that things are being taken care of. And the most funny part is that after a little bit pushing, China is the most quick in accepting vulnerabilities and fixing them, compared with my own country, the Netherlands. So in the Netherlands, we take about 8 days, and China only takes 4.9 days. So they're actually doing it better than in Europe. And we want to know why that is. The differences between all these continents is culture. It is never a technical problem that says, okay, this vulnerability takes more time to fix it than here, or the infrastructure behind. It is always a cultural thing. So especially what we noticed in East Europe, if you want to report their vulnerability, you will never get a feedback, and probably they will not even accept it. And why? Because they don't know you, you didn't shake hands. In China, the biggest problem was they didn't know us. We had to drink tea first with them. After drinking tea, they make it much easier. So if you look at the internet now, we see it as a threat landscape. And this landscape is still littered with vulnerabilities like Heartbleed, which is a very old vulnerability from 2014. Silly vulnerabilities like Poodle, Padlock, Shell Shock, and Dirty Cow, which for people that are not very well known in the infosecurity terminology, this can be a little bit confusing. But the biggest risk factor we see here are users or entrepreneurs that want to build a new service quickly, put it on the internet, put it to test. And actually that is the reason why we have so many websites that can be hacked easy, why it's so easy to deploy malware, and why it's so easy to build control networks for bad things. We use, as a GI, we use a lot of open source information like OSINT. Most of them because they are free and free available to everyone. So especially GitHub is a very nice place to start to look for private keys, passwords and other things, because this is where products are still in the development phase. And this is also a good place to start for detecting early on vulnerabilities. But as you probably also saw in the morning session, I think this morning about OSINT, Shodan and Elasticsearch and Census are great places to start. If you want to start finding vulnerabilities on the internet, I suggest you start here. So, because we started our project focusing on the Netherlands, we wanted to know how many Dutch domain names there were. So we asked the Dutch register, can you tell us what Dutch websites there are? Because we want to know if we want to scan them to see if they're vulnerable. Can you give us that information? Well, that's not possible, so we had to start scanning the entire internet, looking for certificates ourselves, and then from those certificates get the domain names that were in those certificates. The funny part is if you start scanning the internet, your ISP will start receiving a lot of angry abuse emails. So this is also bypassing your fair use policy on Gmail services. So that's another interesting challenge. So, and the moment that you start scanning the internet, you're going to store IP addresses. Well, European law doesn't help us with this because according to the European law, a dynamic IP address is now suddenly personal data. And if we store personal data in a database and we're not taking care of that, we share it too much, we can get in trouble with the law. So scanning is legal in our country, but it's not storing the IP data secure can be a risk. So what we did actually is build a dashboard built on Elasticsearch. We have a GitHub repository where this dashboard is on and how you connect all these open sources. And you create a very quick dashboard that indicates hacked servers and devices that are vulnerable, and especially data leaks. Because we are interested in open servers that are not supposed to be open. Database servers, file servers, Hadoop cluster servers. And in the end, to get all these servers fixed, this is the end goal. We want to get the internet clean and safe and more structured again. So I was talking about Heartbleed. If you now Google for Heartbleed this morning, you will see the Heartbleed is a vulnerability from 2014, but is still very active in the news. This is still recurring. So that is strange. And if you start looking in Census for Heartbleed, you find these systems everywhere in the world. Well, you say, well, who cares? They're probably webcams or nothing important. But actually, if you take that query and type in bank, you will find all the banks in the world that still have web-facing devices that are vulnerable for Heartbleed. Well, okay, you can laugh because you see here Greece. Well, the Greece banks are empty anyway, so and Russia, who cares? But there are also other banks you can find there. And the moment that you send a bank an email, hey, your portal server is visible in Census and it has Heartbleed, plus this is the SSL scan that proves it, then sometimes a bank has to shut down just for a while because they cannot anymore confirm that their transactions from the last few years were safe. So, because of time, I'm going to skip these. So, one of the other databases that were very popular in the last years is MongoDB. MongoDB has been shipping for years with an unsafe default setting. So when you install MongoDB and you don't change any security settings, your database will be open to the internet. And that helped because in some point in time there was always about 45 or 40,000 databases open to the internet. And of course, we keep reporting these to the owners. Be careful, people are going to steal your data, they're going to destroy it. And actually, that happened in January. In January, we saw a new form of attacks on these systems. Someone wrote a very simple Python script that crawled all these databases. They deleted everything and just left a ransom note behind. From pay me half Bitcoin and you'll get your data back. The problem behind this is that these people never exfiltrated data. They just deleted everything and just leave a note. And this was the first disrupting and another way of operating in this field. So, and why we're always running behind these MongoDB databases, because most hospitals are using MongoDB databases because they can just easily connect every registration system to it. So, 10 minutes. The most known case with MongoDB is probably CloudPets. the cloud database was a very interesting responsible disclosure, because we reported to the company, be careful, your database is open and it's leaking millions of audio messages from children to their parents. But the company never reacted to it. We tried email, we tried LinkedIn, Facebook. And then another researcher found it, Brian Krebs, and he made it public. So at that point, it was for us no reason to keep quiet about it. The most interesting part is that they, still till the day till now, they deny that they ever got an email from us, which it doesn't matter. What the good thing is that in California now, there's a new law for making, if you make these kind of toys, you need to have some security standards applied. So thank God that was a good lesson out of it. Well, this is done the examples of the ransom databases, the databases that were open and get ransom with messages like this. And in the end, they even start selling the hacking kits for it for a few $100. And after this thing went live, we saw more and more systems getting compromised by people to just buy the script and just run it for fun. So as GDI, we've been monitoring all these systems. Couch, Hadoop, Elastic, and Redis are very known new systems that are, if you Google for them or you will find them still open on the internet. Of course, this one is the most interesting, because if this is running, maybe Kibana is also running, and Kibana with Elk Stack is mostly used in security operation centers for keeping your network secure. So if these systems are still open, then you're leaking a lot of information. So we wrote generic security warnings with a little guide how to fix them, and we send them to all GovCerts in the world to have them distributed like that, and that worked pretty well. Coming back to MongoDB, when the attack started, we needed to inform the world that we saw these attacks and where these attacks were coming from, and we wanted to share all indications of compromise in an easy way. Well, if you're running this organization with 3 men, then you need a way to do it. And we found actually that the Google Slides, so the spreadsheet, you can switch it to public. And anyone that Googles for a Bitcoin address, or for an IP address, or for the Bitcoin, for the ransom message, they will instantly find it as first result in Google. So that was a very effective way for us for sharing this data. And still, this sheet is still up and running, and every week we get a new request for a new entry to add. So these attacks are still going on, and people who still are willing to add their compromised data. And let me see. This is a nice one. My daughter likes to play computer games, and she likes to play big titles. And after she finished the game, she starts using mods, Nexus mods. Nexus mods allows you to go into the game data and add extra things or change things in your script. The funny part is no one probably ever mentioned to start looking in the configuration files for comments or for IP addresses. So I was going through with her to get some new settings for her to make the game more nice, and suddenly we find an IPv6 address as commented out by the developer from please leave this server open because for getting resource files. And the fun part was that that IPv6 address was indeed resolvable to a Hadoop ADFS system. Which is not very readable on the screen, but let me see how much. It was 750 terabytes on data. This was actually the backup or production server for that company for hosting all the DLCs and everything else. So we checked that server again for IP4, and for IP4 it was beautifully firewalled. So what was the problem here? Well, the problem is that this server was behind a firewall all these years. And IPv6 was only available for inside the office for the developers. But at some point the ISP followed a good idea, oh, it's IPv6 launch day, click, let's put it open on IPv6 for the internet. So the funny part is every time when we report about these attacks and vulnerabilities, we have these very sharp discussions on Twitter about whose fault it is when they get hacked. And still in the infosecurity, we are like to say if people get owned because they left their systems open or not patched, it's their own fault. Well, yes, it is maybe their fault, but someone needs to help them, because we've been dealing with victims from those ransomware campaigns. Like you have to tell a group of researchers that they just lost years of research data on leukemia. And that's not a way. Then you cannot say it's your own fault. No, then you have to look for a solution and say, how can we this prevent from ever happening again? We're going to skip this because I think this has been in the news enough. The fun part is that in January, when shadow brokers released their package from here, you can buy our package. These are the vulnerabilities that we have. We already knew that you had to start blocking these ports because there was a 0 day out there that could, hit these services, especially when they're accessible through the internet. So when WannaCry hit in May, we started getting help requests from all over the world. Just imagine your Twitter DM following with international organization help. I'm being hacked and I don't dare to go to my government because I'm scared for legal things. Can you please help us? So we try to help as many organizations as possible. But in the end, it was not to be able to be stopped anymore. The only thing that we could do was like look at the network and then say, okay, you have to segment it here, you have to segment it here, patch it, and look and show them these are your servers on the outside, why they're still vulnerable. The same, of course, with NotPetya. This is now known as one of the biggest cost factors of these attack. And why these attacks are possible is because that vulnerability, Eternal Blue, with the speaker next to me will start talking about, is still out there. So that's the reason why we scan the internet and why we keep reporting these vulnerabilities, because these things need to be cleaned up. And this is an example how we did it in the Netherlands. We just created a database with all the Dutch IP addresses that were vulnerable, with city and ISP next to it. So then we contacted the ISP, say this is the list with all the hosts that are vulnerable for Eternal Blue. Please help fixing this. So we make a generic responsible disclosure email from this is your server, it's vulnerable, you need to patch it or put it behind a firewall. Can you please help us with the distribution? And within 1 week we were able to get down from 15,000 vulnerable hosts to like 300. And those 300 are because they are not owned by a Dutch company, by just a hosting company from outside the Netherlands who doesn't want to cooperate with security researchers. So, and after that, we started focusing on Germany, Ireland, and England. And actually, it was possible to bring down the amount of vulnerable hosts within a week from thousands to just a couple hundred. So, combining social media and OSINT information and just a helpful hand to get systems patched in time before they get hacked is very good doable. And I'm doing this for 19 years. So, the last thing I want to say is that voting machines are now getting more and more media attention. If we look at voting machines like at DEFCON, how easily they can be hacked is one of the reasons we need to keep more investigating in devices that are rarely used but very important and share this information. In the Netherlands we did the same, and that was for us. When we tested the device, it was the only advice, go back to paper and pencil because this is not going to fly. How much time I have left? 1 minute? Okay. So this is the amount of slides that I will show to people that are just in InfoSec or are an InfoSec manager and they want to understand why this is so important that we patch all the easy things. To start to become a cyber criminal, you don't need much tools. You can just simply go to GitHub and get a nice red software to get you started. But actually, if that's too difficult for you, you can find open source ransomware with a nice video instruction how to get through it. But still, you have to be able to use a keyboard and you have to type some commands that are not so easy to remember maybe. And you have to build probably your own web server. But nowadays, of course, on dark markets, you can buy the best ransomware available that will pass any security. And the good thing is that it's become a service because you just pay $5,000 or you pay just $30 if you help spreading the malware on 200 computers. But how are you going to do that? Because you're not a hacker. You can just enter Windows systems, right? That's impossible. Well, you can buy just a list with VNC servers, Windows computers with running VNC with no password, where you can just drag and drop your malware on. But still, then you have to invest like $50 for that list. So if you just go to Shodan and type has screenshot true, you can find about more than 1 million systems online that has VNC running with no password, because otherwise they couldn't make the screenshot. Even that, if you say, well, Shodan, that's where everyone goes, that's not so fun. There's also a nice website called The World of VNC. And here you can just browse through all kind of systems that are open with IP address, and you'll find systems online like POS systems. So if you drop a piece of malware here, ransomware, and you don't ask too much money, guaranteed will be paid. Because these systems are just drag and drop. You find Windows 10 systems that are fully patched and with running antivirus that are open. You find banking systems. Don't worry, these samples are all taken offline, so don't get any vanilla days. But also airports, handling luggage. And of course, Dutch entrepreneurs who are working their bookkeeping systems online. So the last thing that I want to give you is that there's new ransomware coming. Ransomware that will abuse the human. The most famous example that we have seen now in the wild is called Popcorn. It will encrypt your files. You can pay 1 Bitcoin to get your files back. It has a nice story, sad story why it's doing it because it needs money. But there's a way to get your files back the nasty way. You just have to infect a few friends of you or enemies by just sending them the link, and when they get successfully infected, you get your files back for free. And this is the kind of innovation we're going to see in the next coming years. Anyone has a question?
One of the things that in the UK we have is the CISP.
Yeah.
As a sharing portal for security, I think it's quite an important feature for the UK because the people who are in there active are people who actually care about cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm trying to encourage people when I see them trying to do irresponsible disclosure, as we call it, is that before they go public, is they drop it to CISP immediately. You allow the company 30 days, because obviously potentially of national interest that has to be disclosed. So you drop it to CISP immediately, you give the company 30 days, then you go public.
Yeah.
So it is, because it's done in that way, people who need to worry about it are aware of it straight away.
Yeah.
You know, things like the WannaCry stuff, they would have been already working on that back in January. The people who not really caring about it, they've then got the 30 days after, then it's public domain.
Yeah.
Whether it take on notice or not is, going back to the comments before. What's your view on that? Do you think we should be doing it that way?
Well, I always try to explain to young people is like, you're going to have a conversation, a very intimate conversation, and you want to be as polite as possible. If you come already with a mechanism that puts pressure to your conversation, that doesn't make it a friendly conversation. Right. So, and I've been doing it for 19 years. I can show you some examples off screen. Our emails are very polite and very helpful, and it works as also within those 30 days. We never have things not fixed within 30 days, unless the problem is so complex that it takes a little bit longer. But you can do reports without applying the pressure immediately. I will do that in a later status when normal communication doesn't work anymore.
So it's not necessary to put pressure on them, but it's more to get it in public domain that, look, this is an exploit that is out there.
Exactly.
Now,
yeah.
You need to start looking at this. We are notifying them. There will be a public release in 30 days if they haven't released a patch.
Yeah.
Doing it that way, say it's the companies who care, who are in these kind of organisations, certainly globally, that are more likely to actually do something. So that if nothing happens in 30 days, and this is now in a crimeware environment, they're not going to be hit.
Exactly. Yeah. So our experience with when we send a report, we always send the reason why we report. Your system is vulnerable. This is how you fix it. Plus, this is the risk that we predicted, and we had a very well predicted that at some point a piece of ransomware or another form of attack will abuse these systems, and then later these companies will contact you. You were right. You already predicted this a year, because that's what we would do. If I was an evil hacker, or a hacker with a bad intent, that's the thing I will do. I will go behind these systems first, because I want to get a foothold as soon as possible and as wide as possible. And the biggest reason why we're pushing so much is that if you now start looking in 2017 for vulnerable systems, it doesn't take you long to find one. There's more actually, which ones can I pick? And that's our biggest worry.
Cool, thank you.
This is a free ebook about Dutch hacking. It's written by someone who interviewed many Dutch hackers. So if you like to read it, it has a nice backstory to it.